Hello F11 members and welcome to the Fundamentals of Post-Production video tutorials for issue 70, November 2017. So in this same issue of the F11 Photography magazine, there's a lowdown feature on the topic of lens corrections. This is in a direct response to an F11 member's request, and in that feature I really get deep into the topic of lens corrections. To accompany that feature, I thought I'd do this video tutorial where I'm processing this picture from Brittany and with particular attention to lens corrections. So let's get started. It was a beautiful evening there, one of the first sessions at the Pointe de Penier in Finistère. Gorgeous light, fantastic sky. Great scene. It all came together beautifully. And what we have here is the raws. And I've got two images here, very similar, slightly different exposures, both of which I've flagged. That one has lovely depth and density and mood to it. This one is slightly brighter. But this one, if we compare the two histograms, they're very similar. But this one has slightly more information. The histogram is bunched a bit further to the right, which means there's just a bit more tonal and color information for me to work on. So this is the one I'm going to process. As is usual, when I imported the image into Lightroom, I applied my develop preset, which I've made, called DNP1. And what that preset does is it actually applies just a touch of vibrance, +6, a teaspoonful really, and sharpening here with a touch of masking. I can, of course, choose to fine-tune those adjustments now when I come to process the picture, but it's a good starting point. So let's look at the image, and the light was perfect. I used a 0.6 ND grad and a polarizer on this shot, and also a 6-stop ND just to get a little bit of motion on the water there. And it's enabled me to give an exposure of 15 seconds there. It was a calm evening, so there's not a lot of water motion, but not long enough to start blurring the clouds there. You can see the effect of the polarizer in the sky there, slightly uneven effect in the sky, but because of the cloud, I think I can get away with it. That, of course, is a function of the 16mm super wide angle lens that I used for this shot. Now let's go down and start by considering our lens corrections. What are they? Well, they're ways of dealing with lens defects. And we can summarize lens defects with basically grouping them into 3 problems that we can choose to deal with. Sometimes we choose not to. First of all, distortion. All lenses distort to some extent. Secondly, vignetting. All lenses are brighter in the center than they are at the edges. And thirdly, chromatic aberrations, which are seen as color fringing around high contrast edges. So in the lens correction tab here, I have the choice of profile or manual. Well, what's that means? Manual means I can apply lens corrections manually, and profile means I can rely on Lightroom to recognize the lens I used, the aperture I used, the camera I used, and then apply the appropriate lens corrections. So I'm just going to click on Enable Profile Corrections, and it recognizes the camera, model, the make, and it recognizes the lens, and it applies the profile to correct for that. And what it's done, if I click it on and off, is it's cured distortion. As you can see, it's stretching the image slightly to cure that distortion, and it's also recognized the uneven coverage and taken steps to make the center darker and the edges brighter to compensate for that. Now, at this stage, of course, I have to say, well, let's consider what it's doing here. First of all, the distortion is just not an issue for me, as is if this were a complex scientific picture, it would be, but for landscapes, a little touch of distortion is rarely an issue. The horizon is nice and straight, so the distortion doesn't bother me at all. The thing to think about as well is the vignetting, and in fact, I actually prefer it with a touch of vignetting, particularly as it's countering the effect of the polarizer in the sky there. So in this particular case, I am going to choose not to enable the profile corrections. Always bear in mind with profile corrections that, first of all, you're darkening parts of the image, brightening the edges of the image, and if they don't need brightening, then you're actually introducing unnecessary noise. And the other thing to consider is that by tackling the distortion, you're actually stretching the image slightly and throwing away pixels. And if it doesn't need to be done, don't do it. The less I do, the better. And so I find with so many of my landscape pictures, in fact, all types of photography, I only rarely enable profile corrections. There is a time and a place to do that, though, and we'll come to that in a minute. Now let's move on to chromatic aberrations. And what I'm going to do is zoom in on this picture. Now let's take, for example, this edge over here of this tiny little island here, one of the Tasses des Pois. Now if I zoom in, and I'm going to come up here and select 11:1 magnification and move it over this edge here of the tiny little island there. Now we're looking at it in huge magnification, but can you see just along the edge here, just a hint of green? And then over here, down this edge here, just a hint of magenta. Now, if I click Remove Chromatic Aberrations on, you can see those are taken out. That colour fringing is removed. Let's take it off again and take you out again and look at a different part of the picture. I'm going to come down to this high contrast edge here where the white rock meets the dark blue of the sea. So let's zoom in again there. And can you see this edge here? There's just a hint of cyan along that edge there. Now bear in mind that if I were looking at this edge, this picture at any kind of normal magnification, I wouldn't see these. It's not something really to be losing sleep at night over. Nevertheless, they're there, and if we can take them out, well, why not? So as you can see, again, clicking Remove Chromatic Aberrations on and off takes out that colour fringing. I'm going to click them off again and take you to another part of the picture here. Let's come over to this edge here. Oh, maybe let's select that picture, that edge there. Okay, we've gone in really tight, really huge magnification. Can't really see much colour fringing there. Click on and off chromatic aberrations there and can't really see much of an effect. So where chromatic aberrations tend to be a problem is with super wide angle lenses, and this is a lens being used at 16mm, and really high contrast edges. But nevertheless, I think taking those chromatic aberrations out is desirable. And so I'm going to click on Remove Chromatic Aberrations. Now, unlike the lens profile corrections, which correct distortion and vignetting, there is no downside to applying chromatic aberration removal to an image. It's not a creative decision. And I've decided that henceforth I'm going to apply Remove Chromatic Aberration to each and every image on import. So what I'm going to do now is adjust my user preset here to do that on import. So if I right click now on my user preset DNP1, you'll see it says update with current settings. So I'm going to click on that, and henceforth, now and update that. Henceforth, on all imports, I'm going to see this chromatic aberration dealt with. So I think that's quite an interesting revelation. Now let's just now come out of this image here and look at another picture from Brittany, and I'm going to go to the next day's shoot, and we were here on this beach at dawn, and there were some wonderful situations there with the mist, the sea mist on the beach there. And I've processed this picture here, and if I take you into the develop module there, just let it cache the image there. There it is. This is the processed image. And now this is one of those cases where, if you look at here, the lens corrections, I have enabled profile corrections. It's recognized the lens I used, the 100 to 400 mm lens there. Now if I click on and off the enable profile corrections there, you can see without the profile corrections, the vignetting is really quite unsightly. In this particular instance, you can see it's almost like a tunnel vision. You know, sometimes it can be really quite an interesting effect. It can actually help to channel the viewer's attention into the center of the picture. And in fact, photographers often add a touch of vignetting to images. But in this particular case, I don't like it. And I think it's far better with it out. So there, I'm going to take it out. And of course, remove chromatic aberrations as well. So to summarize here, the bottom line is that profile enabling, making lens corrections is a creative decision as to whether you want to remove that distortion, a touch of distortion and a touch of vignetting, or whether you think it's actually beneficial. And always bear in mind that the less you do to a picture, the better. And a little bit of distortion is not a bad thing. Just to finish up, I just want to show you from another shoot from this particular trip here. Let me just find the relevant picture. And it was this morning here where I was shooting these fishing boats on the derelict fishing boats on the harbour. If I'm looking at these images here of the fishing boats, for example, now I've shot them with my 17mm TSE lens. So if I go to develop here, and now if I come down here and try and enable profile corrections, it doesn't see the lens. It's got the wrong lens there. That is because if I look here at all the profile corrections available for all the different Canon lenses, the 17mm TSE is not there. So therefore, applying the profile correction for the wrong lens is not the thing to do. So what I'm going to do is I could choose to do my lens corrections manually in this case. So looking at the picture, do I see any distortion? None that I can discern, certainly. If I did, I could control it manually this way, as you can see. But as I said, I can't see anything wrong with this picture, so I'm not going to do anything regarding the distortion. In vignetting, if I thought the image was too dark at the corners, I could control that here. As you can see, go too far and it brightens the edges way too much. I think in this particular case, I'll put, again, it's always going to be a creative decision. And of course, I could go the other way and put vignetting into the image there. So in this particular case, I'm going to just put a touch of plus vignetting on to even out the picture. Let's zoom in on an edge here and just determine whether we've got color fringing issues. So I'm looking at 11:1 magnification there, if I go back to profile and now remove chromatic aberrations, you can see a very, very little effect there, virtually indiscernible. One of the best ways of actually dealing with lens defects is to buy a decent lens in the first place. And you can see this is the 17mm TSE lens. There's a little bit of purple fringing. Can you see there? At the edge of the frame that the chromatic aberration removal tool is dealing with. In fact, it's quite noticeable against that bright sky. So that's a classic case of chromatic aberrations. Dark edge against a bright sky at the edge of a super wide angle lens. That's when chromatic aberrations are going to be a problem. So I'm going to apply chromatic aberrations. I've applied a touch of manual vignetting control, and now I zoom back out, and those are my lens corrections done. So I hope that all dovetails well with the lowdown series on, the lowdown feature on lens corrections and lens defects. Hope it all makes sense, and please, if you have any other burning topics that you'd like dealing with in these tutorials, please let us know. See you next month.